my dog starts barking, I apologize. It's either the AT&T man outside my house or we are having a break-in. At this point, I'm not sure anymore. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Gia. I am a 26-year-old lady who lives in my mom's basement, and today I wanted to talk about Monsters Born and Made by Tanvi Barwa. This was my most recent read, and it wasn't until I was about 3/4 of the way through it that I decided, I have more to say about this than would go in a traditional reading vlog. So, thus, this video was born. First, I'd like to say though, if this is your first time seeing my face, hi, welcome. I'd love to see you stick around, so make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of me talking about books and my re-uploaded Twitch VODs or me talking about games. I added Monsters Born and Made to my fall 2022 anticipated YA reads because I thought that it sounded really interesting. I didn't, of course, get around to it until January. It's January, but nonetheless, I did get around to it as I am getting around to all of my fall 2022 reads. I have snuck them into my TBRs just so I can actually accomplish all of them. When I first picked the book up, it was giving me kind of Hunger Games derivative vibes, but the description of the book was that it was a South Asian inspired fantasy, so I wanted to give it a shot because I knew nothing about it. Plus, it included mythology that I was not familiar with, and I love learning. The story follows our girl Coral. She is a 16-year-old girl who is the middle child in an impoverished family. In this society, there are either renters or landers, and the renters are the lower class and the landers are the upper class. It is very much a two-caste system where the two castes live entirely separate lives, where the renters are scrapping by, having sort of a more provincial village life, whereas the landers have this more sci-fi inspired, like very clinical, very like white bed sheet kind of life. So the world is both dystopian and futuristic at the same time. There are also a couple of hints that this is the future of our current world, that this is taking place in this universe. So our girl Coral, her last name is Hunter. This was fine at first until I found out that her family's occupation is literally to hunt a certain aquatic creature called a maristag. Now, I was starting to get a little bit of PTSD from the selection because I read that last year, and what I said at the time is that my 16-year-old self would have eaten that shit up, but upon seeing a couple other things about it later on, not great, but I do intend to read it because it is something I would have read as a 16-year-old and it just missed me, and that's part of my whole reading journey. And anyway, so Coral Hunter, her family's responsibility is to hunt these specific creatures, and every 4 years there is a race called a glory race. So Coral's family is responsible for hunting, breeding, and selling/distributing these creatures that are used to pull chariots for the chariot race that happens every 4 years called the glory race, and this year is the 150th year of the glory race. Now, in the past couple of years, Coral's family has fallen on hard times. There was an incident several years prior where 2 male maristags went mad in captivity, and they broke out of their enclosure and killed some of the stable masters and kind of tore through the streets and killed some civilians, so the public kind of lost some trust with the Hunter family. The family name and occupation was given to them by the Lander government, so at any point this could be taken away from them, and this occupation kind of brought them up a little bit higher in the renter caste, so it wasn't exactly the bottom rung. There wasn't defined ranks within the renters, but the Hunter family was definitely, I guess you could say, more of like middle class, in that they were given a very important job that had a lot of high regard, and they dealt with landers a lot, so they got a lot of disdain from the other renters. This kind of isolates them in that they are not exactly renters, but they are definitely not landers. So the family is experiencing classism from above and from below. So when we first enter the story, it is the end of Maristag season, and it's like the last day of the season, and if Coral and her brother do not catch a Maristag, they are probably going to go hungry, and they can't afford their little sister's medication. Their little sister, Lyria, has a chronic asthmatic disorder that requires constant medication, and so the family is almost always destitute as a result of the several years of bad luck that have happened to them. In the very beginning of the story, Coral and her brother Emmerich are going out to try to have this last chance to catch a Maristag because it's the last day of the season. And they find a Maristag, but Emmerich is nearly killed. He is bitten, and Maristags are venomous. So he is bitten by a Maristag, and in order to save her brother's life, they let the Maristag go, or Coral lets the Maristag go. And then her father is mad at her for not letting her brother die and not bringing the Maristag. So now her brother is sick and dying, and they already have a debt with the pharmacy, so they are unable to get the medicine that Emmerich needs. However, Coral has a best friend named Crane, who is basically an orphan. Her mom died some time ago, and her dad is a lander who, in return for Crane never seeking him or looking out to find out who he is, he sends her a stipend every month, like a bag of money, to basically say, here, survive on your own because I know your mother's dead, but also don't ever come looking for me. So Crane kind of is a free agent. She doesn't really do much. Like, she and Coral have this like little craft stand that they have sometimes, but otherwise Crane doesn't really do anything. She's basically a stay-at-home orphan. Crane gives Coral the money that she needs to get the medication for Emmerich, but the pharmacist is still mad that they haven't paid the debt for Lyria's asthma treatments. So what does Coral do? She defies all expectation, and she enters the glory race by switching out somebody's name card for hers. It is not illegal for renters to be in the glory race. They've just never entered before. It has been an exclusively lander tradition in that the renters have just never done it, and as such it has kind of formed a tradition around it that it's not illegal, but they are going to bully you for doing it. So Coral decides to make herself a massive target from landers and renters, because this is a Hunger Games-esque situation where people's names are picked out of a bowl, and she basically cheats her way in. That this makes her a target from other landers who are trying to live up to, say, a parent's legacy, like some characters are, like Dorian is, but there are others who just want to do it for the fortune and glory and gold, which is what the gold part is what Coral is doing it for, so that she could save her sister. Unfortunately, this makes it so there are numerous attempts on Coral's life, including from a contestant's father, and this contestant she has a bit of a past with. Now, Coral and this character, his name is Dorian, they are 16, and they keep referring back to this incident, or this series of incidents that happened 2 years prior when they were 14, in that they had this like a star-crossed lover situation where they couldn't be together. And I just couldn't take it seriously, because they were talking about an experience or a set of experiences that they had as 14-year-olds. So the depth of their emotional connection, I just couldn't take seriously. But then again, I am 26 years old. One of my main criticisms of this is that I believed that they should have aged this up at least 2 years. I think that Coral should have been 18. One thing I do want to roast real quick is that I haven't described to you what a Maristag is quite yet, other than that they are aquatic and they are venomous. So, okay, I wish I could do an artist's rendition of what I think that this thing looks like, but it would look horrible. So, okay, I'm looking at my Goodreads review, just so I can remember this correctly. So, the Maristag is described as amphibious but reptilian in look, in that it is being amphibious, it can breathe underwater, but it looks reptilian and it has scales. It has very long antlers. Like they curve and they curl and they go all over the place. If they toss their heads back, they can like accidentally impale you. Like, that's how long that they are. But they're also venomous. I described them as venomous water horse dinosaurs because they are used as chariot racing animals. So that was a bit confusing to me, in that their role is to be caught and then purposely bred, and then hopefully they get a kind enough disposition that they can be trained to pull a chariot, so that it's like horse-like to me, but then they're reptilian, so they look like almost like dinosaurs, and then they're venomous also, so it's like a poisonous frog meets a reptile meets a horse. The glossary said that they were bipedal with shortened forelimbs. Now, this would be like your Tyrannosaurus rex, Spinosaurus, Allosaurus. These are these very, very large predator animals that are bipedal and shortened forelimbs, so they don't need them except for maybe fighting or anything. It's not evolutionary advantageous for them to have extended forelimbs or for them to be quadrupedal. I said, now I'm an anthropologist, so I've taken a few courses on evolution, so you can imagine my confusion at the idea of a creature who lives almost exclusively in water, but has prominent bipedal locomotion and is amphibious, so it can definitely breathe underwater. I couldn't help imagining them as horned walruses. Like when I was reading the book, I would imagine a horned walrus. But when you look at the glossary and actually look at how they are described, you can say that a meristag is what would happen if you took Jurassic Park's rendition of a Spinosaurus and then you made it both amphibious, venomous, and antlered. Because I just kept thinking about that scene in the third Jurassic Park movie when the Spinosaurus is swimming in the river, and it's the boat scene where they have to call the satellite phone and call Ellie's house. So I kept thinking about that Spinosaurus scene, and I was like, okay, so it's a bipedal animal that can swim, but it also can live in water primarily. It lives in water primarily, but it's bipedal. It would only be bipedal if it was a terrestrial animal, so that you can imagine my confusion as to how the fuck this animal exists, other than just evolution got really, really drunk. And there were other elements of this with the mythology that there were other animals that were like this. So they had like an animal called an aquabat, for example, which was a winged animal that was in water, but it could also come out of water, and it acted like a regular, almost like vampiric bat in a way that it varied in size, and they had really long talons, almost like pterodactyls, but they could swim. And they lived in water. Anyway, enough about the evolution side plot. Coral's family has exactly one meristag. It is a small female meristag that has had numerous chances to breed, but she has not been able to. She was the lone female meristag that they bred in captivity when those two male meristags went mad and like terrorized the entire town. So the folks in town believe that she is cursed and don't want to breed any of their male meristags with her to kind of help the Hunter family out. So as a result, she is really lonely, but she has a friendly enough disposition, but she is also a horned, venomous walrus. To say that everybody proceeds with caution with this small little meristag, Coral names her Stormgold, and they find a chariot somehow that is really rickety, and they enter the race. Coral enters the race, and the race is like if you mixed Mario Kart with the Hunger Games, in that they have to complete the race on a track that has dangers, but then they are also dangers to each other. So this is like the Hunger Games, the Selection, and Mario Kart all put together. There are a couple of side characters who are important. Dorian, I already talked about. Arlene, who is another charioteer. At first, she dislikes Coral for no reason, and then we find out later that time when the Meristags got loose and killed a bunch of civilians, Arlene's father was one of those civilians, so she's holding a deep grudge against Coral, which it's misplaced, but it is a valid grudge to have. But it wasn't Coral's fault that those Meristags killed her dad, so Arlene is just a villain that is inserted at the last minute. At the beginning, she's more like a mean girl. And the real villain is Dorian's father, Solomon, who on numerous occasions tries to get Coral killed, including putting her in a giant safe and throwing her off a cliff into the ocean. I don't know how she, in hindsight, that was pretty wild. She basically used a animal that was very predatory and communicated with it outside of the box to kind of trick it into hunting her. And then she got out of the water before it could kill her. So in hindsight, she was kind of playing 4D chess, but she could have gotten herself killed at the same time. And then all around this, there is the topic of discussion concerning rebels, and there is a rebel force that has been kind of secret. The renters have a black market that is their own little microeconomy that is all about distributing illegal goods, and they keep it a secret from the land or government because otherwise they wouldn't be able to survive. So Crane is connected with these rebels. She is again an orphan who receives a stipend from her dad just for existing and not for going after him, so she doesn't even have to have a job. Meanwhile, Coral knows what it's like to be hungry, and this is where I decided to do a video on this book, is because it felt like this book could be two completely different books. This book could be the Hunger Games X the Selection X Mario Kart and probably do well. This book could also be a discussion on class and privilege and how you can only afford to dream if you don't have any immediate needs. So back to my criticisms, I said age the characters up. Dorian and Coral being 16, talking about this amazing world-stopping connection that they had when they were 14, talking about what could have been. They were 14. It was hard for me to take that relationship seriously. Arlene being a stuffy lander and then immediately a threat because a Maristad killed her father held very little weight. Judas was basically Finnick O'Dare, except I thought they were going to do more with him because his name was Judas, and this was a book aimed at people who were younger than me. So for a character named Judas, he didn't do any Judas-esque behavior, he was just Finnick O'Dare. Where it clicked for me that this book is two books is that there is this discussion between Crane and Coral where, first of all, Crane has the privilege of being a rebel because she is protected by her lander father's money, and that she's never had to scrape by for any sort of livelihood or do much of anything except live by her own means due to her position. She lives alone, she barely works, she's a free agent, but Coral knows what it's like to be hungry. So when Crane is asking Coral why she won't consider joining the rebel cause, because she has kind of made herself this martyr by being the only renter to enter the glory race, Coral basically tells her that she has more to lose than Crane. Coral isn't out to break any boundaries or do like Daenerys Targaryen break the wheel or anything, but she just wants to survive. She wants her family to survive. She wants to make sure that her sister survives. So this is when it clicked for me that Crane has the privilege to desire change, to dream of a better world, and that you're allowed to want when you're not in immediate need. This is a very intricate way to say that this story is about a mixture of classism, progressivism, class divide, and then loyalist versus rebel causes, in that our Mockingjay in question doesn't want to be a symbol because she has too much to lose if they lose, and historically they lose. Later on, we find out that Coral's mother, who is in an abusive relationship with Coral's father, he is abusive, we find out later that Coral's mother was a rebel, and she married into the Hunter family as an arrangement to protect her from scrutiny, but because she made a sensible marriage, she was protected by this family that is considered higher class than the other renters, revealing to us that Coral's mother was a rebel and her marrying into the Hunter family was a move of self-preservation due to the reputation of the family. She drops a line saying she was told to betray her best friend. I wish we found out that the Landmaster was this best friend, that this Landmaster whose best friend escaped punishment and scrutiny, maybe the Landmaster's parents were killed in a rebel attack that turned them loyalist again. This Landmaster schemed for years to trash the Hunter family. Then when presented with the opportunity for a Hunter child to win a chariot race, she invents a rebel cause out of thin air to frame Coral as the Mockingjay in this situation to finally get back at the Hunter family. Because I also said that the accident leading to Arlene's father's death, the enraging of the two Maristags that then went wild in town, I said that maybe perhaps this could have been a purposeful action, that this was a tampering or a poisoning, where something happened where those Maristags were enraged on purpose, and that Arlene's father was just caught in the crossfire, and it created a very long grudge that Arlene held against the Hunter family, and thus Coral causing her to act out during the chariot race. I also said that this could have been a way for the landmaster to be subtly starting the demise of the family by basically destroying their foundation of trust with the community by causing an accident that, by all accounts, could have looked like one, but wasn't. I feel like this book could have been a really deep exploration between class and privilege, but also race, because the renters are notably brown compared to the landers. The landers are always discussed as having very, very pale skin because they never have to go outside. Again, their surroundings are extremely clinical. They have these medical pods that can basically cure anything that's wrong with you, even to the point of erasing tattoos. So Coral goes in one after a fight and she comes out, even half of her tattoos are gone. Meanwhile, the renters, we get instances, at least in the very beginning. See, this is only mentioned in the very, very, very beginning, that Coral and her brother have to often go out in search of this. I think it's called scava jelly, which I think must be a sort of jelly given off by a jellyfish because they live on the coast and, you know, they're in the water a lot. But it's a type of jelly that they use as a skin protectant because they are always out in the sun. But this is never mentioned ever again. This need to protect yourself in the sun because you are darker than the landers is never mentioned again after the first couple of chapters. So I feel like the narrative is all over the place. It's like, are you trying to make a story about class, race, gender, progressivism, rebellion? Are you trying to write that story? Because I wanted it to tell that story. I wanted it to tell that story about privilege and classism and how it's okay for the protagonist to not want the entire world to change because they're more worried about putting food on the table, because it's a very real reality for people, especially here in America. Not to get real for a sec, but that is an extremely real thing that does happen. You can't invest your mental and emotional energy in wanting things to change for everybody if you cannot feed yourself. And I think that when you're writing a story that at its root, you're trying to make it about progress and going away from what is the norm now, you need to start there. You need to start there with we need things to get a little bit better so that they can get much better. Instead, we would have these little snippets of conversations with Coral and another character pertaining to her class or her race or something, and then the next chapter would go right back to the Hunger Games again. And I really, really dislike when things are called out for being derivative, but unfortunately trends do occur in media. But not everything is a product of what came before it. You can take elements of things and turn it into original stories. But what I am not getting here is you were almost there. I feel like this story just needed another push. And that's why I could only rate it 3 stars. I couldn't rate it any lower than that because, frankly, I wanted to root for it so badly. But it just kind of like how I wanted to root for Touch of Power. I want this story to be good. Touch of Power made me angry. That's something else entirely. But I want this to be good. And it's very clear that at the end of the story that this is at least going to have a sequel. So it is at the very least going to be a duology. And it doesn't have an exact release yet. It says January 1st, 2024. But it says that it takes place in the same universe on a different island. This story has a lot of potential. There is a lot there. I think that it is worthwhile. And I think that it is a good story to read. I think that Tanvi Berwa does a great job at creating something that has potential. Unfortunately, that potential has yet to be reached. On Goodreads, it has an average of a 3.56, and again, what I do is I go and I read other reviews after I have already finished the book and I have written my review, because I want to see if other people are seeing the things that I am, because if they're not, did I miss something? Did I miss the point? Because sometimes the point can be missed. If a source of media is meant to be deeper than it is, you know, you can miss the point. But I was finding a lot of people that felt similar to how I felt. I would consider picking up the sequel once it came out, but it would depend on how long it takes for it to come out and if my interest in this story is at all anywhere near close to where I feel right now. Because if it came out next week, I would read it. But if it comes out in 2 to 3 years, I'm not entirely too sure. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you'd like to see more of my face, you can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and Instagram. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Remember to drink water and be nice to each other and exude kindness and empathy with everything that you do. And I will see everybody in the next video. Bye.